This
and share his
conference will
knowledge
now be recorded.
on tax audits. Ketan, as I had shared on the group, has been with Deloitte tax team for the last 18 years. Ketan is a regular attender at the tribunal, appears on his own as well as briefs pretty much all the leading councils in Mumbai, at least. Of course, he attends tribunals at various other locations other than Mumbai as well. But Ketan's been seen with pretty much all the top tax council in Mumbai at least. And of course, in the 2 decades that I have known Ketan, I think a couple of things have stood out. Certainly very intelligent, very committed, consistent, and which is a very big thing, and very diligent. And I think it's going to show in his presentation, which has been very meticulously prepared by him and Sauravi. And of course, Ketan has a lot of practical experience as well, having handled a lot of litigation. So I think it's going to be an interesting evening. Uh, there is a time comes when we need to kind of revise tax audits because there are just so many amendments which happen, and then there are so many legislative changes which happen as well. And I think this would be interesting because Ketan should be able to probably take us through the whole thing. Ketan, I think, has moved out of, seems to have got logged out. We will have to wait for him to log back in. Palak, you will check once.
Yeah, I'll just check.
पीपीटी किसका शेयर करना है? हेलो,
हाँ,
तो पीपीटी किसका शेयर करना है?
पीपीटी शेयर करना पड़ेगा. आई थिंक सौरवी और केतन, वन ऑफ द टू विल शेयर इट. Ketan has logged back in, so we'll just check with him whether Ketan, you will screen share or you want Sauravi to do it?
I would prefer if someone can run the presentation because if possible.
आपको मैंने ऑप्शन दिया, केतन से ऑप्शन दिया आपको शेयर करने का.
Yeah, but I am not able to share, and while sharing only I just got logged off.
Okay. Sauravi will be able to do it because she's familiar with your presentation. That's why. Otherwise, I'll ask Palak to do it. But
yeah, I think even Sauravi is on the phone.
We've made Sauravi the presenter, so she would be in a position.
I think she's also logging. She's also logging in from a phone, so she may not be able to. So,
Palak, can you do it in that case?
Yeah, I'll do it. I'll just.
Thank you.
So Ketan, you probably missed your introduction, but I was saying that Ketan is of course intelligent. Ketan is consistent over the years and very conscientious in his preparation. I've seen it myself at the tribunal, the way you've been preparing for your briefs as well as appearing. So it's going to be an interesting evening for sure. Tax audit, of course, has gone through its pangs and gone through immense amount of amendments and a lot of jurisprudence as well. And I'm sure you will take us through some of the interesting changes which have happened of late. So Ketan, all yours. Please do take over, and Palak will help you with the sharing of the screen.
I actually have the PDF and not the
PowerPoint.
Yeah.
But you can open the PDF also, should not be a problem.
Then yeah, Palak, open the PDF only. Then I think that should be fine.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks Apurva sir, and good evening to everybody. What I understand is that we are going to have a discussion and a deliberation rather than a presentation. So what I would request is to please stop me wherever you want me to answer any questions, or whenever we have any points, interesting points which I may have missed, but can be shared with the larger team for discussion. And Palak, just do a view reading mode. Go to view and do a reading mode. Yeah. So if we move forward, I think the topic for our discussion today is tax audit and the recent amendments. Before we go to the recent amendments, a few basics and a few changes in the basics also. Governing provisions of Tax Auditor 44 AB, which prescribes the list of cases where an assessee is required to conduct to get his accounts audited by an accountant and furnish a report on or before the due date. Now, interestingly, from due date for the tax audit has changed with effect from assessment year 2021, and now the due date in terms of the explanation 2 to section 44 AB is 1 month prior to the date of furnishing of the return of income under 139(1). So if we have to consider that, then the due date for filing the returns of income for assessment year 2021 have to be considered, and we have to work backwards by a month. In terms of the press release dated 9th of November 2021, which is actually a circular number 17 of 2021, the due dates, if we consider the due dates for filing of the tax audit reports, filing of the returns, and work backward, the due date for obtaining a tax audit report in a case where transfer pricing is not applicable is 15th January 2022, and where transfer pricing is applicable, the due date will be 28th January 2022. If we can move on, I think. So an important amendment has been made in the tax audit by the CBDT wide the notification number 28 of 2021, wherein with effect from 1st April 2021, there has been a amendment in Rule 6G. Just go further down, wherein sub rule 3 has been introduced, which says that the report of audit furnished under this rule may be revised by the person getting revised by getting a revised report of audit from an accountant duly signed and verified by such accountant, and furnish it before the end of the relevant assessment year for which the report pertains. If there is any payment by such person after furnishing of the report under sub rule 1 and 2, which necessitates a recalculation of a disallowance under 40 and 43B. Now, what this rule says is that the amendment which is permissible is only vis-a-vis, or a revision of a report is permissible only vis-a-vis section 40 and 43B. Obviously, the rationale for this is that due date is 1 month prior to the date of furnishing return, and to iron out difficulties faced at a later date between the mismatch in tax audit report and the return of income. The question which now needs to be answered, or which now needs further deliberation, is whether, if not for any of these two clauses, can we revise our tax audit report. And I don't know if anyone has any views thereon, because prior to this, revision of tax audit reports were being done. That revision was being done in accordance with our institute's guidance note, which had 3 circumstances for revision of a tax audit report. It had given a few illustrations for revision of tax audit report, and in my personal view, I think with this sub rule, the position does not change. Even otherwise, we can still continue to revise the tax audit report if it is really necessary, and people have been revising, and that position should continue in the past. I don't know anyone has faced any difficulty in revising a tax audit report, maybe when in the e-filing mode or electronically, or if anyone wants to share the experience.
I think the only thing is you need to give a reason. So I think that is the only issue, that whenever you are filing a revised return, they actually ask you to spell out a fairly detailed reason of why you are revising, and actually which is fair, because they certainly would want to link the earlier report with the one which you are filing now, and there should be cogent reasons. And I agree with you, Ketan. My view is also that if there is a payment which is specifically made after the tax audit report, then in that case, revising of the tax audit report would almost be mandatory, feeling which you'll have a 143(1) issue for sure. And if there is anything other than these two, I think you still probably be permitted to revise the report. But of course, reasons will be required, and the reasons will have to be documented as well.
Yeah. Because I have seen in the past, at least in the last year, where there were many clients corporates who could not finalize their accounts. And because they could not finalize their accounts and because there were losses, they filed the return on the basis of unaudited accounts, and basis the unaudited account tax audit reports were obtained. And subsequently, when the accounts were audited, and in fact they actually filed their returns once again, revised their return, revised the tax audit reports and all, to provide a tax audit report on the basis of audited accounts. So all that was done last year, and even prior to that I have seen audit reports being revised. Yeah. Moving on, the next amendment is the one which had come into force sometime last year, and where the amendment stated that in order to reduce the compliance burden on small and medium enterprise, the threshold limit under 44AB was increased from 1 crore to 5 crore, provided cash receipts and cash payments during the year do not exceed 5% of the total receipts or payments, as the case may be. Now, here, just pausing here, and why I am taking some time here is just to go through the provision once again slowly. The provision, the proviso which is inserted is in 44AB subclause A, which states that provided in a case of a person whose aggregate of all amounts received, including amounts received for sales turnover or gross receipts during the previous year in cash, do not exceed 5% of the said amount, and aggregate of all payments made, including amounts incurred for expenditure in cash during the year, do not exceed 5% of the said payment. So when we are comparing 95% and 5%, if we strictly see the section, what it says, all receipts and all payments. It does not say all receipts of sales, etc. It does not say all payments of expenditure, etc. Meaning thereby that if there is any loan received or any loan taken in cash, subject to other provisions of the Act at least, and that is more than the 95%, that is less than the 95%, then also the relaxation for obtaining tax audit may not be applicable. The Finance Act 2021 increases the limit from 5 crore to 10 crores, and the condition in respect of amount received and amounts paid are to be fulfilled independent of each other. So if one of the condition is not satisfied, then the increased limit would not apply. So next, so just here is an example that in this case, on the receipt side, the percentage of cash is 7%, whereas on payment side the percentage of cash is 3%. So if you read the law which says receipts and payments, so the relaxed limits would not apply. Now another question which came across, which actually someone asked us, was that can a professional avail the benefit of the enhanced turnover limit of 10 crores from the tax audit? Now, as we are all aware, 44AB subclause A talks about every person carrying on business, whereas 44AB subclause B says that every person carrying on a profession. And this explanation, which the proviso which is there, is only vis-a-vis business and not vis-a-vis profession, and hence clearly the enhanced turnover limit would not apply for professionals, where income is shown as income from profession.
So Ketan, one of the issues, so of course this makes it a little more liberal, because once I have to take 5% of total receipts, and that would include capital receipts like loans and all of it as well. effectively you're getting much more amplitude when it comes to the 5%, when it's a total of receipts, total of payments. We
Yes.
received this one query from one of our audit guys saying that so if there are withdrawals which are done by partners, so there is cash which is withdrawn from the firm and which is given to a partner, whether that would be counted as a part of payments. My view, of course, was that no, what you have to look at is payments which are made in cash. So I think if money is withdrawn, I mean, it was a gray area in terms of whether that would amount to a payment which was made, because it would kind. If you looked at the cash book would actually show the payment of cash to the partner. So there are a lot of firms where monthly drawings are done from the partnership firm. So what happens is that you withdraw the monthly expense from the bank, and it is shown as a withdrawal by the partner. I'm not too sure whether that should be treated as a cash payment as well.
See, the section says aggregate of all payments.
All
Now,
payments,
payments, this is a withdrawal by a partner. Now, obviously, partner and a partnership firm in terms of, in eyes of the Income Tax Act, are two different,
are separate. Yeah.
two separate entities. So, if one goes by that logic, but then is it a payment? It is actually a payment, or is it is a payment different from a term withdrawal?
So this, in a way, if one looks at a partnership firm as being independent of the partner, then in that case, here is a case where the partnership firm has paid this amount of cash to the partner. And
Correct.
whether we call it withdrawal or whatever, the fact remains that it would, if accounting was strictly done, you would have had a cash withdrawal coming into your cash book, and then there would have been a payment of cash to the partner.
Correct.
In which case, it's a gray area, but one could possibly take a view that this does represent a cash payment, and therefore, if I mean, in a situation where you are a borderline case, you should stop doing this, and what you should be doing is you should be transferring the money to the partner by check and then asking them to withdraw it from their personal cash account, so that you don't fall under this interpretation trap at all.
Correct. Yes, because that, when in doubt, just
Yeah, when in doubt, I think plan and be careful. Yeah, so
correct, because
if a little bit of planning is cheaper than litigation, at least.
correct, because not filing of a tax audit report in time in turn means that your due date for filing a return is different from what you have considered today. And in cases where you have losses, the risk of not setting off losses also is a big point of concern. Yes, if we can move on further, now I go clause wise, and while as Apurva started with the fact that tax audit has been on scene since quite some time, issues have been ironed out. While issues have been ironed out, every year we have new provisions of law which have come in, or you have new amendments which bring in specific reporting in the tax audit report, or new cases which would change the way in which we report things in the tax audit report. So that's why periodically it becomes necessary to go through each of the clauses in the tax audit report and think about what will be the change. And over a period of time, I have been doing presentations on tax audit report, and this is generally the period where you do that. And the thing which I sit with is a tax audit report and give some 3-4 minutes to see which of the amendments in the past year would impact. So those are a few ones which I have kind of captured. Some maybe which were there even earlier, but always better to refresh. So the first clause which I would want to just kind of run through is it says that where an assessee is liable to pay indirect tax like excise duty, service tax, sales tax, GST, if yes, please furnish registration number or GST number or any other identification number for the same. Now, a question which was to be deliberated here is that an entity is entity is liable for GST only in cases where under the reverse charge mechanism. So whether you should report that in this clause, and the institute's guidance or the implementation guide of 2018 has clarified that even if the liability is under the reverse charge mechanism, uh, the reporting is required to be done, with a clarification that liability is only under the reverse charge mechanism. Next clause which we can look at, or which is important, is, there is this clause A, whether assessee 8A clause A, which says whether assessee has opted for taxation under 115BA, BAA, BAB, and the new provision is whether the assessee has opted under the two new sections which are added, which is 115BAC and BAD. BAC and BAC, as we are all aware, is specified relaxed slab rates on giving up of certain deductions and exemptions, and 115, which is applicable for individuals and HUF, and 115 BAD is taxes on certain income of resident cooperative society at a specified relaxed rate of 22% plus surcharge and cess on giving up of certain deductions and exemptions. One interesting point here, or just a sharing of experience here, last year we had a client which opted, which when it was doing its tax audit report, just go back to that slide, go back to that page. While doing the tax audit report, felt that it should not opt for 115 BAA. It did some calculations on its own, and the auditor in the tax audit report very clearly said that that the assessee has not opted for the relaxed tax rate. Now subsequently, after after a while, when it started to prepare its tax computation return, etc., it realized that in the long run, or going forward, 115 BAA may be more beneficial, or even for the year under that particular year under consideration, BAA was more beneficial, and it actually then in the return of income specified that I will go in for a BAA. It went in for a BAA, and basis some discussion and some disconnect between tax audit report and the return which was being filed, it ultimately convinced the auditor that while it is not strictly required, because at that point of time when you signed the tax audit report, I had not opted for the BAA, but now I want to opt for it, and hence if you can help me revise the tax audit report. So the auditor actually helped out and reported this, saying that it has opted for. Because the form which had to be filed along with the return of income was to be filed on or before the filing of the return of income for opting for the lower tax rate. And auditors...
Ketan, this is actually very similar to writing the exam paper, that when you're writing the paper, you should always be mindful of what the examiner will think. So you have to keep in mind that not all cases go for scrutiny, and not all cases you get a chance to plead. And therefore, you must keep in mind that if 143(1) processing is to be done using robotics, whatever you do should be in sync with that. So keeping that in mind, sometimes it is better to revise and ensure that you're reporting correctly, so that when a algorithmic processing of the return happens, you are not going to be in trouble. Because if you get into trouble, I think we've all noticed it, that it's very difficult then to get out of it.
Correct. Yeah. So moving on, the next slide which we can look at is slide which is clause 9B, and whether there is any change in the partners or members or in their profit sharing ratio since the last date, the particulars of such changes. So while the changes are being reported, we are all aware that now with the Finance Act 2021, with effect from 1st April 2021, two new provisions have been introduced in the Income Tax Act, namely clause 9B and section 9B and section 45(4), which provide for taxability of income on receipt of a capital asset or a stock in trade by a specified person from a specified entity, and capital gains on receipt of money or capital asset by a specified person from a specified entity. So any reporting in these two clauses would immediately trigger an impact analysis by the authorities under section 9b and 45(4), and hence while filing the tax return or by looking at or even while doing the tax audit, we can try and examine whether these sections are applicable and ensure that the impact, if any, is considered and duly correctly examined in terms of the new law. While the amendment is by the Finance Act 2021, but it should be noted that it is applicable from 1st April 21. Next clause, which I just put on slide here because there have been over the past few years, there are very many clients who come across this issue and a question comes. When there has been a clause 13b says that whether there has been any change in the method of accounting employed vis-a-vis the method employed in the immediately preceding year. Now the question which the audit team or the audit colleagues ask or the clients come across is whether adoption of Ind AS for the first time could be considered as a change in method of accounting from a tax point of view. In my personal view, the answer is no, it will not change, because from a method of accounting point of view, it is only cash or mercantile system. The Ind AS or any other accounting or the principal or GAAPs proceed on the basis of it being a mercantile system of accounting, and hence transition to Indian accounting standard should not be treated as any change in the method of accounting. Now the next clause which is here is clause 16a, which requires the tax auditor to report the amounts not credited to the P&L account, and one of the items therein is the items which fall within the scope of section 28. Now, as we are all aware, section 28 is very omnibus, and one of the clauses there is value of any benefit or perquisite, whether convertible into money or not, is supposed to be required to be reported in terms of 28(4). Now, with this, we can refer to a decision of the Pune bench of the tribunal in the case of Archeon Battery Company Limited, wherein this sort of an issue was examined. So it will just give us a flavor of what the authorities are looking at. So if we can just go up. The facts of this case were that the assessee was engaged in business, and it had received an external commercial borrowing from its holding company for the purposes of acquiring certain capital asset. During the year under consideration, the assessee had credited to its reserves account a sum of rupees 25 crores, being the amount of ECB loan which was waived off by the parent. The tax auditor, the assessing officer, held that this amount is taxable under 28(4) of the Act, and the CIT appeal held that the loan was availed for the purposes of capital asset, and waiver thereof was a capital receipt not liable to tax. What does the ITAT do? The ITAT, relying on the decision of Mahindra and Mahindra Supreme Court, held that in order to invoke the provisions of 28(4) of the Act, the benefit which is received has to be in some other form than in the shape of a money, and an amount received as cash receipt due to waiver of a loan can in no circumstances be considered under 28(4) of the Act. So the ITAT upheld the decision of the CIT appeal on the premise that the waiver of loan amount has been credited to the capital reserve, and therefore there is no benefit or perquisite other than in form of cash, and cash receipt on waiver of the ECB loan is not taxable under 28(4) of the Act. Recently, in one of the other cases which I have read while not referred to in the slide, even the Mumbai bench of the tribunal in the case of Owens Corning, I think it is ITA number 402M14, has taken a similar position, relied on Mahindra and Mahindra, and in that case the ITAT order records that the DR had argued that assessee has not shown where the loan was utilized for, and hence it is unclear whether it was a capital receipt or a revenue receipt. the ITAT goes on to hold that the utilization of loan is not relevant. What is relevant is that the loan is waived off and hence it is not taxable under 28(4) because it is not any value of any benefit or a perquisite in a shape other than money. So that principle can also be of use when we are examining this kind of issues from a tax audit point of view. Yeah. In this slide, I think what I wanted to highlight was the amendment which has been made by the Finance Act 2021 by introducing the second proviso to 43 CA1 and 56 to 10 of the Act, whereby just go up a bit, whereby the tolerance limit in the section 43 CA and 56 to 10 has been increased from 10% to 20%. If the following conditions are satisfied, that is, there is a transfer of a residential unit between 12th November 20 to 30th June 2021. Transfer is by way of a first time allotment of residential unit to any person, and the consideration of the transfer does not exceed 2 crores. While the amendment has been made by the recent Finance Act, but it will impact our tax audit year, which will be March 2021. The next clause where there is a reporting, there was an additional reporting field which was introduced for the assessment year 2021 to include reporting for adjustment of WDV under 115BAA. Since the claim of additional depreciation is not allowed, an adjustment was to be made in the block of an asset. This year, new provisions have been introduced similarly, given that there are two new sections, 115 BAC and BAD, which are applicable from assessment year 2021. So this reporting field has been inserted. Adjustment made to the written down value under section 115 BAC and BAD, which is only for the assessment year 2021 and 2022 only. The next reporting requirement which has been put is by the Finance Act 2021. Provisions for goodwill depreciation have been amended to say that depreciation will not be allowed on goodwill of a business or profession, and the clause also requires an adjustment to be made to the block containing goodwill as an asset. Accordingly, a new reporting requirement has been added, which requires us to report adjustment made to the written down value of intangible assets due to excluding of a value of goodwill of a business or profession. So this is also an important amendment which has to be borne in mind. And I'll just pause here for a minute to understand if there were any experiences last year vis-a-vis reporting of adjustment under 115 BAB. Okay, we can move. On the goodwill reporting, a new rule has been introduced called Rule 8AC, computation of short-term capital gain and written down value under 50, where depreciation on goodwill has been obtained in the earlier years. So this rule is also important and may be of relevance in cases where we have such reporting in the tax audit report due to a client having claimed goodwill as a depreciable asset in the earlier years. Yeah. While this clause has always been there, the clause says any amount paid to an employee as bonus or commission for services rendered, where such sum was otherwise payable to him as profits or dividends. In this connection, two decisions which I saw of late. First is of the Delhi bench of the tribunal in the case of Abro Technologies, the shareholder directors were given commission for promoting sales and increasing the sales of the company. The commission was paid as a percentage of sales turnover and was duly approved by the board of directors. The AO disallowed this commission by applying section 3613 3612 on the count that employee who would have otherwise been entitled to receive profits or dividends by virtue of shareholding and company having accumulated profits, then the practice of giving bonus or commission cannot be allowed. So this was the position of the tax officer, and the CIT appeal reversed the order of the assessing officer. The ITAT held that the directors were given commission for promoting sales and increasing the sales of the company, which was due to their efforts over a period of year, and the results of their efforts were also seen in the increased turnover and profits of the assessee's business. The payment to the directors was approved pursuant to a board resolution which entitled them to receive commission, and it was also in terms of the employment agreement or employment conditions, on the basis of which the directors were independently rendering services to the company, and hence such remuneration or commission is a part and parcel of a salary, and expenditure is an allowable deduction. Then it also noted this condition that if at all it was to be a dividend, then as per the Supreme Court decision, Supreme Court's analysis also, dividend has to be made payment to all shareholders equally, and dividend cannot be paid to Mr. X or Mr. Y independent of the others. Dividend is a return on investment, and salary a return on investment and not a salary. Accordingly, the commission paid to the shareholder directors was allowed as a deductible expenditure. Similarly, there was another case of the Mumbai bench of the tribunal in the case of VVF Limited in ITA number 6908, and an order dated 9th of August 21, a decision by Mr. Mahavir Singh and Mr. M.K. Agarwal. In that case, the resolution for payment of commission to directors were through an extraordinary general meeting, and the officer said that this extraordinary general meeting and the minutes thereof are just a method of this extraordinary general meeting and the minutes thereof are of no purpose, and he disallowed the commission applying 3612 of the act, but the ITAT reversed the AO's order. So long and short of it, if we have any such payments which are to promoter directors, etc., then the key to distinguishing that this is not covered by 3612 but is a salary or commission is the documentation which is maintained by the company to show that it is not to be disallowed. The next clause which is there is a contribution received by employees from various funds as referred to in 3615A. So employees contribution to PF, ESIC, Labor Welfare Fund, where we have been taking a position that if the payment is made beyond the due date specified in the relevant act but before the due date for filing the return of income, then the payment is to be allowed. And there are various decisions starting from Elom exclusion to now recent, not so recent, but decision of 2014 in the case of Ghadke Patil Transport, that employee contribution also, even if it is paid after the due date specified in the relevant regulation but before the due date of filing of return of income, then the 43B provisions would apply and a deduction would be allowed for the same. Now subsequently, now the Finance Act 2021 has made an amendment to that section. If you can just go down the next slide. The Finance Act 2021 amended the provisions of 3615A and 43B in terms of which amount received from employees, if it is not deposited between the timelines for the concern of the relevant funds, the same will not be allowed as a deduction. There is a confusion on where these provisions will be applicable from, because the explanation says it is clarificatory in nature, but the memorandum says it will apply from assessment year 2021 and subsequent years. So while reporting in this clause, we should be conscious of the implications of such reporting. Move on. Recently, even after the amendment, the ITAT has held in these cases that the amendment is only clarificatory. Amendment is prospective in nature and it won't apply to earlier years. But the way in which the act is worded, there is still some doubt. And while we are on the issue, the CPC has been making adjustments left, right, center on this particular aspect of the matter. And in cases where amounts are substantial, people against an intimation under a 143(1) have also filed appeals to the Commissioner Appeals challenging this disallowance. But at least in my experience, I have seen faceless CIT appeals orders where you have this issue raised in a 143(1), and it seems that they have a template of the order to be passed to decide this issue. It is a 25 plus page template, basis which they are disallowing this. They are disallowing this expenditure if it is paid beyond the due date of filing of the tax return. In fact, some time back I was attending some hearing, and the department argued that post this amendment, this deduction should not be allowed, and the ITAT member also said, but even after this, there have been tribunal decisions which consider the amendment and decide the issue in favor of the assessee. So, interesting point which was made by the department was that earlier 43B provisions up to the due date of filing of return, people were arguing that basis alum extrusion, amendments made in 43B were retrospective and could not have been considered as prospective. So why should the same logic not apply to this amendment also? So what will happen further in judiciary is uncertain, but this is an important aspect which we should bear in mind for the purposes of our tax audit. Next clause which is of relevance and a particular item therein which has once again triggered or invited a debate in the tribunal, and which I think many of us see in our daily life, daily activity: expenditure incurred for any purpose or an offense which is prohibited by law. And something which strikes us immediately once we look at this clause is the payment made by pharma companies or to doctors where they sponsor their trips, etc. And post the amendment in the MCI regulation, any payment made to a doctor is not considered. Just go down a bit. Section 20A(1) of the MCI Act says, refers to the standards of professional conduct and etiquettes to be followed by medical practitioners, and the rule 6.8 says that a medical practitioner should not receive gifts from just down. Medical practitioners shall not receive any gift from any pharmaceutical or allied healthcare industry and or their salespeople or representatives. We have seen various assessment orders passed right from assessment year 9, 10, 10, 11, where the tax officers have been disallowing this payment in the hands of pharma companies by invoking the MCA guidelines and applying section 37(1) explanation. But over a period of years, the tribunal has been going slow on it or going favorable on it and saying that the MCA guidelines apply only to the medical professionals and don't apply to the pharma companies, and hence the expenditure cannot be disallowed. The AO also in this case, in this particular case, the AO relied on the Himachal Pradesh High Court decision and one more decision of the tribunal. And the Mumbai bench of the tribunal, headed by Mr. Pramod Kumar, has kind of reached a conclusion that the decisions relied upon by the assessee, which is that PHL Pharma and other decisions, don't take into consideration the earlier decisions which were rendered, which is these three decisions of Himachal Pradesh High Court and the Liva Healthcare. And if there is a prohibition for incurring an expenditure by a pharmaceutical company, such expenditure should not be incurred. And hence a recommendation has been made for constituting a special bench of the tribunal on this particular issue. So I will just pause here for a minute. Anything till now which any other clauses which I would have missed out, or any particular item in the clauses which I have discussed which need further deliberations?
So that means, Ketan, on this issue of delayed payment of employee contribution, effectively it's like a loss case as it looks as of now.
Yes.
As in,
Not
at least
for all-
at the CIT appeal level, while one always thought that there was, I mean, CIT appeal level, the only thing which you can succeed on could probably be whether this falls within 143(1) power or not, in terms of whether it's an adjustment which is permissible or not under 143(1). But on the merits, they probably are not going to rule in favor.
At least at the even 143(1), I have seen commissioner appeals orders deciding against, on the ground that there is a mismatch between the, the tax audit report very clearly says that it has been paid beyond the due date
Right. Okay.
prescribed under the relevant act. So then where is the
I think
question of,
then there is a clash in terms of the fact that the tax auditor has no choice but to report it, because that's the way the reporting format is.
correct,
And the tax officer was actually, I mean, the tax auditor in the past was never saying that it is disallowable. He was only reporting it. It's like club payments, where you are required to report club payments. And the minute you report club payments, we've seen so many 143(1)s where the club payments get added back, saying that it is a part of the tax audit report and therefore needs to be disallowed under 143(1).
correct.
And you can't tell a tax auditor not to report it, because that would be incorrect. And if he reports it, then of course you're sitting with this disallowance.
Correct. Practical experience, club payments addition was made in a 143(1). We filed an appeal to the commissioner appeals. The commissioner appeals, faceless commissioner, allowed 50% of the club expenditure. Now, how in a 143(1) can someone say 50% is allowable for business and not for the purpose of business? And the worst part about the worst part about this is that the stakes involved in these kind of issues are so small that
Yeah,
does
you
not
can't sometimes
justify.
afford. You can't sometimes afford the litigation. In fact, we have had cases of this late payment of PF ESIC also, where we have to tell clients to bite the bullet, saying you can't afford the litigation. And now with this trend of it not happening at CIT, I mean, earlier I used to think that if it gets done at CIT appeal level, it's fine because the stake is not large enough for a second appeal to be filed, and therefore it's okay. It's worth the attempt once. But now, after hearing that a standardized order is being passed, and it is actually the appeal is not being allowed, one has to rethink whether you therefore have the wherewithal to go till the item. And now with this amendment coming in, probably spoils the show completely.
Complete, because
And
if you
completely losing sight of the fact that one is not permitted to pay employers' contribution and employees' contribution separately. The payment has to be made together, and therefore, logically speaking, I think the treatment which you give to one should be given to the other. So if one were to say that employers' contribution is fine and it's kosher to pay till the due date, but employees' contribution has to be paid in time, that's actually an impossibility, saying I couldn't have paid the employees' contribution because the employer's contribution. And therefore, to give separate treatments only complicates the law.
Yes, and in one of the earlier decisions, I think it was of the Agra bench or some other bench, the ITAT, even after the amendment, had held that the amendment does not apply for the earlier years, and hence even the NFAC has to be bound by the jurisdictional High Court decision, which is the High Court where the assessees registered offices and all that. But I think the faceless officers are just blindly copy pasting that those few pages and confirming the disallowances.
Okay.
Yeah. So just moving forward now, details of the next clause which one can consider is details of payments made to non-residents. Now, the thought which whenever someone was looking at this clause in the past, the first payment which comes to mind was commission paid to non-residents and software payments made. Given that there was this Karnataka High Court ruling which was against the taxpayer, and whereas commission paid to non-resident was more or less settled by various high court decisions, payment for software etc was still a doubt in the minds of the taxpayers and also the tax auditors. Whereas now when we are going to examine the reporting of this clause, one will have to look at the principles laid down by the Supreme Court in engineering analysis to decide whether software payments are liable for TDS or not. I think broadly the concept of the Supreme Court decision is that if it is for payment of use of copyright, or whether it is a payment for use of copyrighted article of thing. In the case of in the later case, the TDS provisions would not apply. Similar issue which used to come up, at least in my experience, was advertising payments made to all these online advertisers like Facebooks and Googles of the world. And there have been cases where we have seen even the officers disallowing, and one such case was this Myntra Design, where there were some advertising charges paid to Facebook Ireland, and the AO held that it should be subjected to tax as royalty, and hence he passed a 201 order, and he also passed a even in a 143.3 this disallowance was made. The ITAT, following the decision of the Supreme Court in the case of engineering analysis, came to a conclusion that when you are looking at 201 payments, or when you are looking at the TDS provisions, you are bound to look at the relevant DTAA, and if the DTAA is beneficial, then even while doing TDS, the DTAA provision should be applicable. And then it followed the Bangalore bench decision in the case of Urban Ladder to held that payment of advertisement charges cannot be considered as royalty and does not give rise to any income, and hence no TDS is required to be deducted under 195 of the Act. Yeah, next item, and the point of relevance of bringing this up for our discussion today, 43B talks about any sum payable by the assessee by way of a tax, duty, cess or fee by whatever name called. So, and it requires it to be paid on or before the due date of filing of return. Here we can refer to the decision of the Delhi bench in the case of Ajay Enterprises, where there was a payment of ground rent for leasehold premises made to the land development officer. The AO disallowed this payment on the ground that on the 43B, on the ground that these are payments to government, and hence 43B provisions would be applicable. If you can go, the CIT appeal concurred with the view of the assessing officer. The assessee relied on earlier decisions and held that ground rent would not fall within any of the clauses mentioned in 43B, and no disallowances on account of damage demanded by the land and development officer for misuse of premises could be made. The ITAT held that 43B is not applicable in case of ground rent, and accordingly decided the issue in favor of the assessee. So one needs to look at whether the payment is in the nature of tax, duty, cess, etc., and then decide on the reporting. Next clause which one can, one needs to be aware of the temptation. We have this clause under 43B which talks about this explanation 3C to 43B. For the removal of doubts, it is hereby declared that a deduction of any sum being interest payable under clause D shall be allowed if such interest has been actually paid. An interest referred to in that clause which has been converted into a loan or a borrowing shall not be deemed to have been actually paid. And recently we saw a decision of the Supreme Court in the case of Aqua, which was publicized as if, where there was a conversion of interest to debentures, and it said 43B provisions not applicable, and hence the amount is allowable as a deduction. If one looks at this decision very minutely, this decision was for a period prior to the amendment. So if you can just go down. So this is for an earlier assessment year 96-97, where 43B was claimed, because this amendment which was there has come in from financial year 2003 or 4. So it is easier to be remember a decision, that there is a decision which says that conversion of interest outstanding to a debenture is not 43B, but one needs to go down to the decision to understand that the period for which it was applicable. Just for that, I kind of included this in my discussion purpose today. Yeah, you can go forward. I think the next 2 slides are all this. Next reporting is 29B, which requires reporting of income chargeable to tax.
Hello, Ketan, can I just interrupt? Sorry, just for small clarification regarding this interest, convertible to debentures. In most, this happens mostly in restructuring cases generally. So yeah, so it's happened mostly in restructuring cases. So now the if it is converted to debentures, then we don't have to apply 43B. We take it as the expenditure which was claimed earlier. But if we convert it into an FITL, then what happens? So a lot of time, what happens?
Sir, even in 43B, this decision would not apply, because this decision is clearly only for the year before the amendment. And the decision actually says that the explanation 3C in 43B is clarificatory, as it explains the section as it originally stood and does not purport to add a new condition retrospectively.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah, thanks.
Yes. Yeah. Next is this 56 to 10, which is required to be reported. And there, I think the tolerance limit of 50,000 has been introduced. So we will have to be conscious of while reporting this. Clause 30C has been kept in abeyance. This is related to GAR. So this has been kept in abeyance till 31st March 2022 in terms of the circular number 5 of 21. Next. Now, brought forward losses and unabsorbed depreciation also, there is an amendment in the reporting requirement. Similar reporting requirement was added last year also because of introduction of provisions of 115BAA of lower rate of tax. Similarly, this year BAC and BAD have been added. So there is an additional reporting requirement in the tax audit report due to this introduction of these 2 new sections. Dividend distribution tax is out now, so that clause also is deleted. And the biggest headache of all tax auditors, 14A also is now out of. So that also is a just aside to this clause. Yeah. Now, whether the assessee has received any amount in the nature of a deemed dividend in accordance with nature of dividend in accordance with clause E of section 222E, furnish details thereof. I just thought to invite professional colleagues' attention to the decision of the Calcutta bench in the case of Manoj Patti. Here, the assessee had purchased a property which was reflected in the fixed asset schedule. The property was acquired in the name of a shareholder director, and it was purchased in the name of the assessee on behalf of the company to save stamp duty. No loan or advance was given by the company to the assessee. Yeah. The AO held that property has been purchased by assessee in his individual capacity, but payment made by a company, and hence treated this amount as a deemed dividend. The ITAT deciding in favor held that there was no evidence which was brought on record to say that there was a loan or an advance given to the assessee by the company for purchasing this property. And if there is no loan or advance given, then the transaction is for the business of the company, then 222E provisions would not apply. And they relied on a similar decision in the case of Zenobia Doctor. Next clause is clause 44, which has been kept in abeyance till 31st March 2022. So I guess now the floor is open for questions, if any.
So Ketan, what are your views on this extension of the threshold from 5 crores now to 10 crores? So it looks like it's a little interesting because the purpose of tax audit really was to pull out the information which would not be very apparent on the financial statements, and kind of delegate the work to an auditor, saying that an assessee may not on its own voluntarily come up with all this information, and that a tax auditor should actually look into it. Now with this increase in thresholds, effectively what you're saying is that a large number of people would actually be out of the tax audit net itself, and therefore there may not be any kind of reporting which is done. I personally thought that increasing the limit to 10 crores was quite a big leap. So even if you have that 5% wala clause which is there, I think that apart, a 10 crore leap is fairly large, because then you have a situation where if I have a turnover up to 2 crores, then I'm still constrained to declare a particular kind of profit under 44ED. And if I cross the 2 crore turnover, and so long as I stay away from this 5% limit, it's like a no man's land. I mean, I can do what I want, I can show whatever profits I want. There is not going to be any inquiry on the whole thing, at least from an auditor. Any thoughts on why this would have happened? Or I mean, it's just slowly that effort to say that, you know, small and medium-sized entrepreneurs, we want them to be out of the compliance bit.
No, I think that is right. And you know, if you have heard the tax of the officials over the past few years on webinars, etc., where they are very clearly saying that gone are the days where we will pick up, you know, so many number of cases in a scrutiny assessment. We will focus on, you know, something from where we will get more revenue, because today the assessments which we do, you know, majority of them get knocked off at the ITAT level. So now there will be an increased focus on cases from where we get revenue. I don't know whether this is one of the, you know, steps in that direction, because I think the thought process is that if you are anyways going to keep this threshold of 5%, then majority of things would be done through the banking channels. And in any ways, we have got that details through the system of AIR, etc.
So AIR is going to be the key, I think. Their ability to capture data from various sources
Yes.
and kind of link it with returns. I mean, I don't know how well they'll be able to do that, but that's probably the key, which is why I think this whole concept of not reassessing beyond 3 years, or not taking cases up for scrutiny, etc. I think it's all fitting into that concept, saying we will be able to do a lot of things by digital matching.
Yeah, artificial intelligence is the term which they
Yeah.
are now preferring and referring to. Because you see, for assessment year 1920, how many returns were picked up for scrutiny? Hardly any.
Hmm.
Even the major ones, which had a
Yeah,
standard
even
set.
big ones were not. Big ones were not. Ones which were going into scrutiny every single year, historically also were spared the rod in this year.
Correct. So, and now with this reopening provisions being tightened up to, as you said, from 3 years to 10 years, and only information which indicates income escaping assessment in the shape of an asset. So with all those conditions, I think they are more banking on self-compliance and focusing on high value.
Would anyone else have any questions or would like to share any experiences related to tax audit? So Ketan has of course covered immense amount of ground and a lot of judgments, a lot of them recent as well.
Just one thing, Ketan, this GAR provision regarding that reporting of illegal transaction has been postponed twice, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Correct, sir.
Last year also, yeah. So I think from what I understand is that they probably will. Because there's a lot of resistance to it, because it's very difficult for any tax auditor to how do the tax auditor really determine what is
Sir,
what is
I
illegal.
doubt even if the tax officer knows how to invoke those provisions.
Yeah, yes, exactly.
Because we recently saw on a tax website, I think we saw it on the Tax Sutra, that they allowed, or the 3 commissioners in Ahmedabad looked at a particular transaction and said this is a valid business transaction. So I guess even they are learning how to look at these transactions.
Yeah.
So sometimes when they ask you to certify these things, you actually start feeling very good about the fact that they actually expect a chartered accountant to be able to understand all this without realizing practical situations that you can at the end of it verify data, but beyond that, I think if you are expected to verify what was not written or what has not been done, I think that's an impossibility. And to expect a professional to deliver something which is an impossibility, it's a lot of respect given to that person, but certainly we won't be able to deliver that.
Sir, also the 15 CACBs, you are supposed to interpret the law and say whether TDS is required or not. But if you see all TDS orders on non-resident payments, the first question which is looked at, the first paper which is looked at by the TDS officer is your 15 CACB. Acha, ye reason diya, no, we can't accept this reason. So
another issue which we have not covered was actually probably relating to last year was that the reasons to be given by tax auditor for difference between the stock statements submitted to the banks and the in the books. Yeah. So how does, for many times, like I think we discussed in one of the earlier forums, that that is fine that you give your what do you call it reasons when you have a stock which is you report the stock which is less than the books. Sometimes because you don't want that much DP, you don't want, for whatever reason you don't want to declare to the banks that much stock, whatever reason, XYZ. But what about the situation other way around, when you've taken a liberal valuation but the valuation books a little lower, then how do we explain that? I mean, you are supposed to explain. How does that work? The auditor to justify, and we can help, if we can throw light on that.
no, so the question is that if there is a difference between a statement given as to the bank and the statement and the stock actually as per books, right?
Yes.
So practically, whenever we saw such adjustments made in the earlier years by the tax officer, I think the first defense which the assessee was taking was that I gave the statement to the bank way before I actually did my
Evaluation.
stock audit and or so. And then if it was major, then people were justifying. So I don't know how is the tax auditor expected to justify that. I think the
Yeah.
tax auditor at best can do is refer to what the assessee explains to him, because when you are going to do the tax audit, you are not going to be able to understand.
Yeah, the reasons.
Yeah.
Okay, if there are no other questions, Ketan, any closing remarks from your side?
No, I guess I have covered anything, and just if there are any questions, please feel free to send me a mail or take a message. I will try and respond to the group here.
Thank you, Ketan. Palak, can we do the formal honors, please?
So, Ketan sir, thank you so much for taking out time for this meeting. This session was actually really helpful even for me because of the excellent coverage of all the tax audit report right before we are supposed to file it, and also the way that you linked all the recent case studies with the tax audit report clauses. It made the session really interesting and really meaningful because many of us are not aware of the case studies recently which have come. And also it was an absolute pleasure to listen to you. Also, Sauravi ma'am, it was really amazing that you made the presentation so excellently. So thank you, sir.
Thank you,
And
Palak.
Thank you,
all the best
Ketan.
for
Thank you
the
very much. Thanks, Sauravi. Thanks for all your help.
Thank you, everyone.
All the best, Ketan. Good evening and have a good weekend, everybody. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Bye.
Bye.